Hey, Bitcoin traders, what is going on? Thanks for joining me for the show. Going to do a quick little update on Bitcoin right now since we have been retracing a little bit from currently setting this trend high. Now, yesterday on Twitter, I actually made a post talking about this big resistance line at 17,000, and we did see a huge smash of that. So we are likely looking at a little bit higher test and now flipping this level as support. So if you're not following me over on Twitter right now, definitely go drop me a follow at coin_trades. Looking forward to chatting with everyone over there. So flipping back to this chart, if we want to redraw basically what we're looking at, and we are on the 6-hour chart right now, but nonetheless, it is still applicable on the 6-hour chart as well. So you can see that we're looking at a big break right now. And especially not only that, but this big break has a lot of increasing bullish volume as well. So only natural to think that we're going to be pulling back and looking to set a higher low and kicking off some of these points, looking for support to happen. Now, one of the things that I need to point out, and it's kind of why I'm in the 6-hour chart right now, is that if we actually turn on the RSI Relative Strength Index right now, then you can see just how far overextended this 6-hour RSI got. So at the high, right before we started pulling back, we were at 80.59. And I want to actually draw a little bit of a price line right here, or a level basically, and kind of zoom out and look at all the other 6-hour RSIs that do have about the same level that we're looking at. So you can see every single time the 6-hour has reached this 80 line since we have hit our all-time high back in November of 2021. You can see that every single time we did get right around this 80 line, it was a very quick run up and a very quick retracement. So even when we haven't seen a complete test of this level, it's still the same kind of concept, and we end up seeing a little bit more of that price action to the downside. So every single time, quick run up, quick pullback. So we've gotten multiple accounts of this. So you can see that right now, it's very much an effective and relevant indicator, since it is a little bit reliable, since it has played out, as you can see, for about 7 times here since pulling back from the all-time high, going on over a year ago. So even looking at the most recent time we did get the same level of RSI, we actually had a huge pullback, and that was when Bitcoin got to almost the 18.5 level. So that's going to be one of the big levels that we look at. But because we're basically the same level of being overextended that we're looking at now, yet prices are quite a ways away. So if we look at how much to the top, we'd still have to see almost a 6% rally just to get to that 18.5 resistance point. And so that's really going to be something that we are looking at. But right now on this 6-hour, we did find our high coming in right around 17,400. Let's go ahead and draw a price line right there. And as you can see, if we do look all the way left, that was this big point of resistance prior to pulling back and actually seeing the run up to the 18.5 resistance that we're looking at now. And the thing is that we were actually in a nice uptrend when we were looking at running up to see prices at this level. But because we were extended and then pulled back and actually lost the trend, setting a new lower low compared to this big, nice support point right at 16.8. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a little bit more of that resistance point and where we do see prices getting stuck up. But we actually do have a lot of nice supports to the downside, so we could end up seeing prices ultimately get stuck in this channel for a little bit longer. So right now, it does seem like the trend high is going to be in for a little bit, so it is going to be about retracing and actually setting some of those lows as support. Like we talked about, 17,000 is going to be that huge level for support, and likely in that instance too, these EMAs will be running up, so we will hopefully find anyway a big period of nice support, both in terms of confirming and back testing these EMAs. Since as you can see, the most recent test, the 12-period EMA, was very nice support before we found our current all-time high, or trend high right now, right around 17.4. So if we do get a retracement and a test of 17,000 and that ultimately does break, we would be looking at a price level of about 16.9 in order to hold as support, since as you can see, we were looking at that level as support, previous resistance, a little bit of previous resistance, and a lot of previous resistance. So that's going to be another key and critical line. If we do end up breaking that, then pretty much we're going to almost guarantee a retracement and a test of some of these lower supports, specifically down to about 16.5. So now I want to actually look at the weekly chart, because I think a lot more is applicable to weekly right now, given what we are experiencing and the potential run up. Because after such a huge long pullback, we know that for about the last 2 months, it's just been more or less stagnation. And I do actually want to draw a pattern, since it does look like we are starting to form a little bit more of a rising triangle. And so typically these patterns are a little bit more bullish, but only mostly when the direction of travel heading into them is at that level. So since we have seen that pullback It's all really going to come down to the current resistance points that are up overhead. And so specifically, even if we do get a little bit more of a rising wedge out of this, then that would be a little bit more bearish as well. But the other thing that we're looking at is this 12-period exponential moving average actually coming down on this weekly chart here for Bitcoin and providing a lot of resistance, because as you can see, the last few attempts to actually break this for Bitcoin has actually led to a lot more downside pressure ever since we had our big pullback back in April of last year. So just to point out again, after a big pullback, we had a little bit of the same period, big run up over a couple months, test the 12-period EMA, pullback, same sort of thing. And then every single test of this 12-period after several weeks' time ultimately got rejected from it. And now, so we are going to be experiencing the same thing once again. So that's going to be an extremely big level that we're looking at on the weekly chart coming up. So right now we are looking at 17,590 as that resistance point on the current. So if we do look to actually see a little bit more upside on the next week, we could get that dropping down as well. And so because of that, that's actually one of the reasons why it's so key and critical right now to actually rally up and break about 18.5, which is where we had our previous trend high. If that doesn't happen, then pretty much we are going to ensure that a lot of these price levels, as well as this exponential, is going to be a big resistance point. And then likely I would anticipate a lot more downside pressure selling again. I know that with such a big, long bear market cycle so far, people are very ambitious and eager to find any sort of excuse possible to actually look to see a little bit more signs of a bull market. And in the short term, we're experiencing a lot of nice bullish upside. But when we do focus and zoom out on the larger trend, we're still looking extremely bearish. And we do have to realize of what the big bearish overhead signals, signs, and resistance points are ultimately end up going to be. So if we actually want to draw a big zone, then you can just see the magnitude of the resistance that we're looking at right now. So pretty much all the way down to about 17.2, which we have just broken above right now on the current weekly, riding all the way up to about 18.8. So those are going to be our big resistance channels and zones that we're just going to have to absolutely smash through. And as you can see, this aligns perfectly with where these exponential moving averages are going to ultimately end up being. However, on this weekly scale as well, we also have a lot of support to the downside, specifically coming in right above the 16,000 level. So that's going to be a big point of support. So overall, what happens over the next coming weeks in this overall zone and level is going to be extremely key and critical for what the outlook looks like for the first part of the year coming up for crypto. Now, personally, I actually think one of the most bullish things that can happen is just a longer term accumulation inside this overall zone until ultimately being able to smash above it. One thing we typically don't want to see is entering this zone, having a quick rally, and then an immediate flush breaking this and having a false breakout. Since we have had so much fear and FUD in the overall crypto spaces lately, personally, it is always better to see a little bit longer of a period establishing those longer term supports and being able to really prove and confirm that prices aren't going to go much lower based on such a big, long period in an overall longer-term supportive zone. Now, the other bullish thing that could happen is that if we do, in fact, get a quick rejection down to, say, about 12,000, which is one of our downside targets, to have an immediate V-shaped recovery entering this zone and then seeing a continuation back again. What we don't want to have happen is a retracement down to about 12,000 and have another longer 2-month period of just prices stagnating at that overall level again, because that's only going to lead to continuation of this longer term bearish pattern. In order to really change a trend in that scenario, we have to have a quick flush, major max capitulation, and an immediate V-shaped recovery buying up prices at that level. So those are the two big things that I would need to see in order to confirm a little bit more bullish action to the upside. Right now, though, we still are leaning a lot more bearish on this longer term scale. And even if we do want to flip over to the 2-day chart, for example, you can just see that we're looking at same sort of thing like we're looking at on the weekly, where prices always continue to get rejected in between this big exponential moving average area. So especially even looking at the most recent test, where we did have our most recent trend high, that was actually right in the middle of what we saw for between the 50 period and the 26 period before retracing and blowing back down once again to find the 12 period as resistance. So now, since we have rallied up once again and find prices in between the 26 and the 50, that also aligns with that huge price zone that we were looking at. And now I do actually want to pull up the volume for a little bit too, because I want to talk about how we've been seeing pretty decent volume, but it's still not necessarily that much to make me think there's a lot of long-term strength in this move that can overcome such a big, strong resistance zone up ahead. And now we do have just over a day left on this 2-day candle, so likely we're going to see a bigger volume bar than what we've seen previously any other 2-day bar so far since hitting this trend low. But the caveat too is that we are also on our 5th consecutive bullish bar and bullish candle for this 2-day Bitcoin chart, which does mean that we are going to be expecting a couple days of retracement and pullback and correction to establish a higher low compared to where we bounced off at 16.5. So those are just a couple of the things that we are looking at right now for Bitcoin. And before we actually wrap up, do want to pull up the VPVR volume profile visible range and just look at the volume over on the side, since we have seen prices get above this big point of mass for volume. So there's actually not that much trading volume until we actually get up to that big price level. So hopefully what I'm trying to say based on this and previous trading volumes is that we could potentially actually see a little bit more consolidation and retracement, not necessarily a pullback, maintaining support on top of 17,000 or even down to 16.9, and pretty much riding a lot of this big point of mass for volume based on this overall trade zone that we have seen, before ultimately running up and seeing a little bit higher highs for the shorter term trend and a test of some of these upper EMAs. But now if we do zoom out, we can actually look at a little bit bigger picture and see that even if we do run to the upside, we're still going to be getting stuck up at a lot of previous price level supports, as well as trade volume on this EMAs, or not the EMAs, the VPVR, excuse me. So even in that instance, in that capacity, that still isn't going to guarantee that we have found our overall lows, especially since we are so bearish on the longer term weekly charts. So now switching over to the shorter term really quick before we wrap up, and as you can see, this is why we look at the shorter term trends, because once we lose the shorter term trend by setting a new lower low, we're actually now expecting a lower high to come in order to see a little bit longer of a pullback on some of these charts, like the 1 hour, for example. We're actually bouncing off in between the 50 and the 26 period EMA, or so if we do want to zoom out as well and look at for the 4 hour, for example, we could be looking at a bigger pullback, which does have us sitting up in between that 17,000, potentially down to the 16,900, even 16,950 range as well. So those are definitely targets to the downside that we're going to be looking at, especially since we have lost the trend support right now, and we are going to be looking for a little bit of a pullback retracement and confirming and testing some lower supports before being able to continue the uptrend or ultimately set a lower high and retrace and find new lower lows. So it's definitely a good time to be patient right now, since it does appear that the current trend has been set. So we at least have a day or so, I think, before ultimately seeing a little bit more of a run up. And I think right now we will be experiencing a little bit more of that pullback. So if you are wanting to make some entries based on setting some support levels, then that could be your opportunity. But as always, not financial advice. And with that, that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today and this little update on Bitcoin. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit that thumbs up, like, and subscribe. As always, do drop me a note, comment down below with your issues, predictions, comments, all that stuff down below. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. That is it for now, though, so stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you back in the next video.